January 17, 1945, Zossen, Germany. The winter wind cut through the pine forest surrounding the Wehrmacht High Command headquarters like a blade through silk. Inside the concrete bunkers, beneath 15 feet of reinforced steel and earth, fluorescent lights hummed over maps that no longer showed advance, only contraction. General Alfred Jodl stood before a wall-sized chart of the Western Front, his finger tracing the red lines that marked American divisions. Behind him, a cluster of senior officers leaned over a marker table, and one of them, General Major Hans Krebs, let out a short, bitter laugh. It wasn't amusement, it was the sound of men who had finally understood a joke told 3 years too late. On the table before them lay intelligence reports from the Ardennes. Numbers, cold, industrial numbers. In 6 weeks of fighting during their last great offensive, the Americans had lost 700 tanks. The Germans had celebrated this briefly, a flicker of the old confidence returning. Then the second page arrived, American tank production for December alone, 2,300 units. Replacement time for total losses, 9 days. The laughter died in Krebs's throat. Jodl did not look away from the map. He simply said, "Gentlemen, we are not fighting an army, we are fighting a factory." This was the moment the Third Reich's military leadership confronted a truth they had long dismissed as propaganda. For years, German generals had mocked American industrial capacity as exaggerated, its soldiers as soft, its resolve as weak. They had believed in the superiority of German engineering, the ruthlessness of German discipline, the purity of German will. But will does not bend steel, ideology does not forge aircraft carriers, and in the cold mathematics of total war, the United States had unleashed something the German war machine could not counter, the terrifying, bottomless abundance of democratic industry. The roots of this miscalculation stretched back to the earliest days of the war. When Hitler's armies swept across Poland in 1939 and France in 1940, German officers spoke of American weakness with casual contempt. They remembered the First World War. Yes, America had intervened, but late, hesitantly, as if embarrassed by its own power. The German General Staff studied reports on the United States and saw a nation divided, distracted, soft from 2 decades of peace and prosperity. They saw labor strikes, political gridlock, a military ranked 18th in the world, smaller than Portugal's. They saw a people who preferred Hollywood films to military parades, who built cars instead of tanks, who valued comfort over conquest. In 1940, when President Roosevelt called for the production of 50,000 aircraft per year, Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring read the intelligence brief and scoffed. He told his staff it was American bluff, the product of a Jewish-controlled press trying to frighten the German people. The Luftwaffe's own production, 10,000 planes annually, seemed formidable by comparison. Göring's engineers assured him that German aircraft were superior in design, that quality would always triumph over quantity. The Messerschmitt, the Focke-Wulf, the Stuka, these were machines built by craftsmen, not assembly lines. 50,000 planes? Impossible, unnecessary, American theater. Then December 7, 1941 arrived, Pearl Harbor. Germany declared war on the United States 4 days later, and in the war rooms of Berlin there was no panic. There was instead a strange, confident calm. Hitler himself told his inner circle that America was half Judaized, half negrified, a mongrel nation incapable of the discipline required for modern war. General Franz Halder, chief of the Army General Staff, noted in his diary that the United States would take years to mobilize, and by then Europe would be consolidated, the Soviet Union defeated, the war already won. The Atlantic was wide, the Americans were far, there was time. But time was the one resource America had weaponized most effectively. Within 6 months of Pearl Harbor, the United States had converted its entire industrial base to war production. The Ford Motor Company, which had produced civilian cars, retooled its River Rouge plant to manufacture B-24 Liberator bombers, one aircraft every 63 minutes. General Motors became the largest producer of machine guns, aircraft engines, and trucks in the world. Chrysler built tanks. A factory in Michigan that once made washing machines now turned out shell casings at a rate of 3 million per month. In shipyards along the Atlantic and Pacific coasts, Liberty ships, cargo vessels capable of carrying 2,500 tons of supplies, were assembled in an average of 42 days. One ship, the SS Robert E. Peary, was built in 4 days and 15 hours, launched as a publicity stunt to demonstrate what American labor could achieve when unleashed. The numbers were staggering, incomprehensible. In 1943 alone, the United States produced 85,000 aircraft, 24,000 tanks, 43 million tons of ammunition, and 23 million rifles. It outproduced Germany, Japan, and Italy combined by a factor of 3 to 1, and it did so while feeding Britain and the Soviet Union through Lend-Lease, sending $14 billion in aid, tanks, trucks, food, oil, steel, across oceans patrolled by U-boats and over mountains defended by fortresses. German intelligence officers read these reports with disbelief, then suspicion, then creeping dread. Surely the numbers were inflated. Surely no nation could produce this much without collapsing from within. They waited for the American economy to buckle, for strikes to cripple factories, for political dissent to fracture the war effort. Instead, American production accelerated. Women who had never worked outside the home became welders, riveters, machinists. Factories ran 3 shifts, 24 hours a day. The United States was not straining under the weight of war. It was thriving, growing stronger, feeding on the very thing that exhausted its enemies: endless, mechanized, relentless output. By 1944, the illusion was shattered. When Allied forces landed in Normandy on June 6th, the German defenders were stunned not by tactics or bravery, though both were present, but by the sheer volume of matériel. The Americans came ashore with amphibious trucks, portable bridges, prefabricated harbors, entire field hospitals packed into crates. They brought so many supplies that within days, Normandy beaches resembled industrial depots more than battlefields. One German soldier captured near St. Lo told his interrogators, "You Americans don't fight a war, you bring a war in boxes, and you unpack it wherever you go." The Wehrmacht had prepared for soldiers. It encountered logistics. German commanders, schooled in the art of maneuver warfare, had always relied on speed, surprise, and the superiority of their fighting men. They believed that a well-trained German soldier was worth 3 Allied soldiers, that superior tactics could overcome numerical disadvantages. But tactics cannot destroy a bridge that is replaced overnight. Strategy cannot stop an army that receives fresh tanks faster than it loses them. The Americans did not need to outfight the Germans. They simply outlasted them, buried them beneath waves of steel, fuel, and ammunition that never stopped coming. In the Ardennes, during the winter of 1944, the German army launched its final desperate gamble, Operation Watch on the Rhine, the Battle of the Bulge. For a moment, it seemed the old magic had returned. German panzers broke through American lines, surrounded entire divisions, captured fuel depots and supply convoys. In the fog and snow, German soldiers looted American positions and found things that confirmed every suspicion they had harbored: crates of cigarettes, chocolate bars, canned fruit, fresh bread, real coffee. One German officer wrote in his diary, "They eat like kings while we starve. How can we win against a nation that considers these luxuries standard rations?" But the offensive stalled, not because of heroism, though there was plenty, not because of tactical genius, though commanders adapted brilliantly. It stalled because the Americans could afford to lose. Every destroyed tank was replaced within a week. Every depleted division was reinforced within days. The Luftwaffe, which had scraped together a few hundred planes for one final airstrike, lost them all and had no reserves. The Americans lost planes too and sent 1,000 more the next morning. By January, the bulge had collapsed, and the German army retreated not in tactical withdrawal but in disintegration. And in the bunkers at Zossen, the generals finally understood. They were not losing because their soldiers were cowards or their strategies flawed. They were losing because they had declared war on an economy that could not be exhausted, a society that transformed consumption into conquest, abundance into armor. Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments, later wrote that the moment he saw the production figures from the United States, he knew the war was lost. We were trying to compete with a nation that produced more steel in a month than we did in a year, he said. It was not a war, it was mathematics. The symbolism of American abundance became a weapon more demoralizing than any bomb. German soldiers spoke in whispers about the Ami chocolate, small brown bars handed out by American troops to prisoners and civilians. To a soldier who had eaten sawdust bread and watered-down soup for months, that chocolate was not kindness. It was proof of something unattainable, unreachable. It said, "We have so much, we give it away." It was democracy made edible, capitalism made tangible. It was the taste of a system that rewarded production, innovation, and labor, not through propaganda or force, but through results. And the results were everywhere. In the ruins of German cities where factories lay shattered beneath Allied bombs, the Nazis had promised that willpower and sacrifice would bring victory. But no amount of willpower could replace the synthetic oil plants destroyed by American bombers. No sacrifice could compensate for the loss of ball-bearing factories, steel mills, rail yards. The German war machine, built on precision and efficiency, required uninterrupted supply chains. The Americans simply erased those chains month after month until nothing remained but broken gears and silent forges. In the spring of 1945, as American and Soviet forces closed in from east and west, the German General Staff met one final time. There were no more jokes, no more talk of superior tactics or German resilience. There was only silence and the recognition that they had been defeated not by soldiers, but by a society that had mobilized every factory, every worker, every resource toward a single goal. They had underestimated democracy, mistaking its openness for weakness, its prosperity for decadence. They had believed that a free people could never match the efficiency of a totalitarian state. They were wrong. The lesson of America's industrial triumph was not merely one of numbers or machines. It was a lesson about the power of a system that trusted its people to build, innovate, and create without the boot of dictatorship on their necks. The assembly lines of Detroit, the shipyards of California, the aircraft factories of Texas, these were not built by slaves or forced labor. They were built by citizens who understood that their freedom depended on victory and who gave everything to ensure it. When the war ended, the German generals who survived were brought to trials, to prison camps, to reckonings. Some wrote memoirs, some tried to explain how they had been deceived, how they had believed their own myths of superiority. But in quiet moments, in the years after, many admitted the same truth. They had laughed at America's production goals, dismissed its industrial strength as fantasy. And then the fantasy arrived on their doorstep, in waves of steel and fire that never stopped, never slowed, never relented. The laughter had fallen silent long before the guns did. And in that silence was the sound of a nation that had proven once and for all that freedom, messy, chaotic, imperfect, could outproduce tyranny every single time.